Hey there, folks. Well, oh boy, it's cold out here. It's minus 33.6. So welcome to global warming. I think today's probably a record-setting day for us. Not normally this cold. It's a good thing I got the heater on in the office. But anyway, welcome to Hangar Chet-Chat, another episode. I think this will be episode number 11. Dog's having a good time out here. Let me see your booties. Let me see your booties. Let's see your booties. Look at booties. See? Got your little booties on, right? Yeah, so you don't get cold. Right? Oh, yeah, you want to show that one too? Oh. Come on, let's go inside.
I want to say, here he goes. Here he goes.
Since we'd done this air race across the country back in 1979, I got to know the sort of the president, I guess, of the Goose, what was it, King City Goose Squadron, I think it was called. His name's Ted. And Ted and I got to talking, and he said, well, look, why don't we just set up an air race, and we'll do it. We'll set it up and see if we can get some sponsors. So we tried. I was sort of the Western representative, and Ted and his group were the Eastern representative. And we tried to get a sponsor. Now, getting a sponsor for an air race is pretty difficult, because if anything ever goes wrong and there's an airplane involved and someone's sponsoring it and their name's on the side of the airplane, it doesn't go well. They don't like that type of advertising. So in any case, and of course we're just all a bunch of amateurs, really. I mean, we're just all either private pilots or commercial pilots. It didn't matter. Obviously, when you have 25, 30 airplanes, something could go wrong. So in any case, we never got a sponsor for the air race. So what we decided to do was put out a news flash of some sort in the aviation publications in Canada here, and said, well, if you guys want to come out and come and join us, we'll set this air race up. I was responsible for setting it up, everything from the West Coast to as far as the Winnipeg area. And then the King City Goose Squadron, they were going to set up the rest of it. And this trip went all the way to Prince Edward Island, Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. So it went from Delta Air Park to Charlottetown, PEI. And we called it the Almost Great Canadian Air Race. Now, the reason why we called it Almost All Canadian, or Canadian Air Race, is because it didn't include Newfoundland, it didn't include Yukon, and at that time the Northwest Territories. We didn't want to say that it was, it involved all the provinces. So that's why when we made the name, the letterhead was called the Great Canadian Air Race. But then what we did is we inserted sort of a little insert, and we made it the Almost Great Canadian Air Race. So anyway, we ended up with about 25 participants in the air race. I think during the air race there may have been one that went as far as Saskatchewan, then something had a family situation or something, and they had to pull out. So anyway, we ended up, I think at the very end in Prince Edward Island, 23 people that actually made the race. So on July the 18th, 1980, we took off from Delta Air Park. And I've got a tape recording which I took, like I did on the previous one, with a cassette recorder, and I have it here. So just prior to me leaving, I was interviewed and by a local television station. So just listen to this.
Hi, Chet. Chet, welcome.
Thank you very much.
I mean, I'll get out of the way here so the cameras take a look at you. Chet, as we mentioned earlier, is the Western coordinator for the Almost Great Canadian Air Dash. You say I'm from Alberta, and I say to you, how come you're missing our province out?
Well, we've got certain legs, and each leg is about 400 miles in length, and it just so happened that we're not overnighting in Alberta, but we are stopping in Alberta to for fuel stops and possibly for a lunch or something like that. But there's no overnight planned in Alberta. Just as there's no overnight planned in Newfoundland, we had to draw the line somewhere, and about 6 months ago we set it up, and we took each leg and we said, okay, now how many airports do we have within a 400-mile area of each overnight stop? And it just so happened that when we got to Alberta, it ended up that we ended up in the next province. So we're just on the borderline out there, which is unfortunate. But we can't go everywhere, and remember that there's a lot of the participants are coming from all across Canada, and to add another stop into it means almost another couple of days for their holidays as well. They all have to get back to where they originated from as well. A lot of them are from out east, and a lot of them are from out west. So the chaps that are from out west, they end up taking about a week or so to get back home, just as the ones that started off in Vancouver and are from out east, they're going to require that additional time to get here. So it all looks, it all ties into someone's holidays at one point or another.
Like this tape goes on for quite a while, so I can abbreviate on that a little bit. So I've already talked to you about a lot of the things that were asked. We had a lot of fanfare, obviously, out of Delta Air Park. The Chamber of Commerce actually paid for a breakfast for us that was provided for us at the little restaurant there. It was Evelyn and Larry Morgan that ran the airport. Evelyn had the restaurant there, and Larry was the airport manager, and good friends of mine, and she always put on a super breakfast. So we had breakfast there. Also, some of the participants that came from out east, they actually ended up staying over at my place because obviously if you've been on the road for a week or more, it's nice to get into a bed, and it's nice to have a shower, and it's nice, So anyway, bottom line is a lot of them stayed over at my place, and fortunately it was kind of at a good time because the wife and the kids were out east visiting relatives. And I had the house all to myself, you might say. So I had lots of room in our home. So they came in and they took the shower and they washed their clothing, used our washer dryer, and I kept on taking them back and forth to the airport because some of them showed up maybe 2 or 3 days early. Anyway, we left on January the 18th, and we overnighted in Trail, BC. Now that was the same place we stopped in during our first air race that we did with Canada Dry. And again, the guys put on a super thing for us out there. I think we had steak supper out there from what I can recall. Then on the 19th, we bombed off and we went to Maple Creek. The weather was not good once we got on the east side of the Rockies. It wasn't good at all. It was the visibility was down in fog and drizzle, and sometimes you get that when you get an easterly flow, an upslope flow they call it. So the boys at Maple Creek didn't think we were going to make it.
Bad news. The fog is getting thicker.
And Leon's getting larger.
Anyway, we did show up. It was quite forward, actually, trying to get to Maple Creek. It's flatter than a pancake out there, so not a big deal. Just follow highway number 1 and hang a right. There's a turnoff off Highway 1. You hang a right. It's on the south end of Highway 1, the Trans-Canada Highway. And there's Maple Creek, and the airport's just on the southern end of town, so no big deal. We all got in. But it was drizzling, it was cool, and I can't remember where I slept. I think I slept under the wing or under the airplane. I can't remember. All I know was it was darn cold, just wrapped up in my sleeping bag. So I think some guys managed to sleep in the hangar, and maybe I slept in the hangar. I can't really recall. It was so long ago. Anyway, they actually put on a good bit for us as well. They did everything they could to help out. Now, all these places en route I had set that up with the flying club. So the one at Trail, I had corresponded with them. The next one being Maple Creek, I had set that up with them, and so forth, all the way up until around the Manitoba area, which was my responsibility for getting it set up so that the participants in the air race had either accommodations or a place to tent, and that there was food and beverages available for their stay. Anyway, the next day we went to Verdun, and we made a stop in Assiniboia, and then we went on for fuel, and then we went on to Verdun, Manitoba. And in Verdun, again, the weather was not all that great. We did have a real good reception out there with the people. Again, I believe it was Kentucky Fried Chicken that sponsored the meal that we had, and then that evening, a lot of the participants in the air race, including Joe and myself, we were put up actually in one of the residents' homes, and we were fortunate enough that it was actually one of the farmers out there that invited us into his home. And we had our own bedroom and so forth, so it was just great. And another thing that was good about it, he actually had an airstrip on his farm, so he's one of these flying farmer type guys. And we even had, I believe, our airplane even ended up in one of his hangars. That was right on his farm. So anyway, that was good. A lot of good people around in the flying community. The next day we went to Dryden. And that was on the 21st of July then. And then the next day, and I think the weather was fine after that. July 22nd, we ended up with a few fuel stops. We ended up in Geraldton. Now, Geraldton was an airport that was just being built. They had about a 5,000-foot runway, but no buildings. That was still in the construction phase, so there was really no place for us. There was no fuel, there was nothing. So what the guys had done, and I believe the club members, and I think there was only about 8 of them, they had built a tent, quite huge, with seating underneath it, and they gave us a breakfast there the next day. However, the day that we arrived, they knew we needed fuel, so there was no fuel. They actually had a truck with jerry cans on board, and they had 450 gallons of fuel for us, which we got at cost. Which is like, I mean, these guys just went all out. So they had like jerry cans, which I think held probably 5 gallons each, and they had 450 gallons of this stuff, and we fueled up our airplanes at cost. It was just unreal what these people did. And then they had a bus, and they transported us into town. Now, Geraldton's about 3 or so miles outside of the airport. They bused us to a downtown to a restaurant, and we had, I can't recall whether it was a steak dinner or something, but it was, again, another fantastic thing, and thanks to the Geraldton Flying Club, or whatever they're called. I don't even know if they're around anymore, but we did have a fantastic time there. And as I said on previous videos, I did have pictures of all of this stuff. This was all lost in the flood of 2013 for southern Alberta, so I don't have those anymore, unfortunately. But I do have. I actually had a slide presentation that I put together after we did this, with which I still have the tape for. But I just, my audio and the music and stuff like that, but I don't have the pictures or the slides to go with it anymore, because they all went downstream. Anyway. The next day we went to North Bay for fuel. We went to Ottawa International Airport. Now, to get into Ottawa, which was a commercial airport, commercial flights were going in and out of Ottawa quite regularly, and so we had to get into Ottawa. And in order to get into the airport, we needed radio. Now, we didn't have radio, so what we ended up doing is we followed aircraft which had radio. Now, I believe there's a couple of airplanes on this flight, on this trip, that did have radios, because there were a couple of support airplanes that we had, and I think both of them were 172s, if I can I think they were 172s. Anyway, there was a group attached to one aircraft with the radios, and we followed him, and another group attached to another aircraft with the radio. And I can remember, and I don't even know if they do this anymore, but I can remember coming in from the, I guess it'd be from the west, flying over the river, just with the Parliament buildings right to our left, and flying on the approach, and I can't recall what runway it is that's in there, but anyway, it was the one that was not the main runway, it was one of the shorter ones that we landed on. And then we all taxied in, and we went to the fixed base operation, and we got there, and this guy standing out there, and he's waving us in, and you know, okay, and that's it, and all 23 airplanes were all parked out there, and so we all got out, and well, they went to, oh, we don't know anything about this. We're sitting back going, oh, well, we talked to so-and-so, and he said it was all set up for us to be here. Turns out that individual had apparently promised that they would take care of us and whatever. But anyway, there was no contract or anything. It was more, sort of word of mouth. Anyway, whether he forgot or whatnot, but he was on holiday, so nobody knew anything about it. So we said, well, now what are we going to do? And we said, okay, that's fine. We'll play it by ear here. And Ottawa was supposed to be a place which was sort of a weather catch-up place. In other words, if we had been delayed en route, Ottawa would have been a place where we would have catch up, because we were going to stay there a couple of days. So as it turned out, we weren't delayed, so we ended up in Ottawa, and now we had a couple of days to kill. And so anyway, we ended up flying to Rockcliffe. Now the guys at Rockcliffe, they were super. They said, well, why didn't you call us first? And I guess that's what should have been done. We should have never relied on this big commercial operation, just relied on clubs, because they seem to do a better job of it. But anyway, we ended up at Rockcliffe, and they said, "Crepe, we would have had the grass all cut for you. You could have parked the airplanes." And as it was, we just all landed, parked our airplanes in the tall grass. We didn't care, and they gave us the courtesy of utilizing the clubhouse, and they were as good as they could be under the hour notice that they had. Anyway, we all bombed off out of Ottawa International Airport, and the tower guy must have been saying, well, this is getting crazy. Anyway, we bombed off to Rockcliffe, and we stayed, and fortunately, Joe had a cousin, I believe, that lived in Ottawa, and we stayed with her. She was in real estate, and we stayed with her, and we had a car, and she showed us around Ottawa. We actually had a very good time in Ottawa. And from Ottawa, we went to overnight in Edmundston, New Brunswick. They had a Lancaster bomber, which they'd flown in, and it was just sitting out there, and it sat there for years. I don't know what the intention was, but eventually, I guess what had happened was you know, when you have an older airplane sitting out there, you know, people have a tendency to the aircraft and damage it and write all over it and whatnot. So they ended up putting a fence around it. However, because we were all in the aviation of it, they said to us, no, look, if you guys want to go on this airplane, that's fine. So I remember going on this aircraft, and it still had everything there. I mean, you could probably start the engine if it had fuel and batteries in it, because it was just still in good condition when we were in it. And we ended up actually sleeping underneath the wing of this Lancaster. Then we ended up going to Sussex, New Brunswick. That was just unreal. I mean, the reason why Sussex, New Brunswick was on the map for us, we weren't planning on stopping there, but we had two of our contestants on the trip. They were from Sussex, New Brunswick, and they had kept the news media aware of where they were on the trip from Sussex, New Brunswick to Delta Air Park, and they would actually have a chit-chat interview on the local radio station out there almost every day as to their progress. And so the news was following these two chaps all the way across the country. Now you got to remember, folks, this is in 1980. Okay, it's not like it is now, where it wasn't a big deal. In those days, that was a big deal. So anyway, they follow these guys and all the way back again. So of course the town was quite hyped up, and so they thought, well, we're going to really show these guys a good time. Even though that wasn't even a stop. Our next stop was actually Prince Edward Island in Charlottetown. So we had to cross, I don't know, 5-6 miles of water or whatever it is out there. But anyway, we ended up staying in Sussex for the better part of the day. And they again provided us with food. They had an ambulance nearby. They had a fire truck, and it was at an airport which wasn't even opened. It was just I think a sort of a semi-gravel strip, hard-packed gravel, and they had some old buildings off to one side. The airport, I think, had been abandoned because budworm spraying was sort of becoming a thing of the past, and that's what it had originally used for. And what they'd done is they'd even put runway markers out on it. They painted on with they painted on the runway, the runway whatever number it was, and where it started, and they basically revamped this airport for our purpose. They opened up one of the old buildings that was on the side, and they did put tables and chairs in it, and that's where we had our lunch. Again, I think it was provided by the KFC. It was a box lunch provided by the local KFC restaurant there. And they had a big construction trailer, flatbed trailer, had loudspeakers on it. The CBC was there, the television crew was there, the mayor was there, a lot of the council people were there, and we were all interviewed. We were all given decals and plaques from the town, and that lasted for hours. It was just great. And then that evening we bombed off and we had to go to Charlottetown. But anyway, so in Charlottetown we wrapped it up. We had prizes, which some of them I had received from aviation orientated or aviation type companies and stores from out west, which I'd taken with me, which were some of the prizes. And we also had the same from the people that put it together from the eastern part. That evening we had the finish party. That was it. We gave out the prizes. Great time we had there. I may have some pictures of that one. If I do, I'll post them. But we had a real great time out there. Again, there was lots of drinking going on. So, needless to say, lots of fun was had. About a day or two, we stayed overnight there. I can't recall where. I believe we stayed in some campground which had an airstrip. And the next day we decided, okay, we're going to bomb off and go home. At least we had to go home. And so we had a bit of a situation because the weather wasn't that great. So we took off, and once we got to the mainland, we ended up in bad weather. So we decided, well, what we'll do is we'll just go to Sussex because we knew what was available in Sussex. Crap, we landed in Sussex. There's people waiting for us at a closed airport. I said, what's going on? Well, we figured, typical Maritimers, they know when the weather is bad and you're not going anywhere. They said, well, we figured the weather was bad enough that if anybody was diverting, they'd probably come back to Sussex, and that's what we did. And so come on with us, and we'll take you into town, and blah, 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 blah. And anyway, we ended up staying with some of the participants in the air race in their home. And we were there for, I think, 2 days. The weather was so bad. And the Chamber of Commerce took us out for breakfast one morning. all provided by the Chamber of Commerce. So there was maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 of us or so that, you know, we had a real good time there while the weather was crummy. In any case, from there we ended up going back, and I ended up going back home to Delta, and I got back home on August the 11th. The total time for the complete trip, I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, the total time for the complete trip was 95 hours. It was actually 94 hours and 40 some odd minutes, 42 minutes or something, but say 95 hours total time for the complete trip from Delta to Prince Edward Island, and Prince Edward Island back to Delta Airport. Anyway, folks, that's it for that trip. That was the Almost Great Canadian Air Race, which took place in the summer of 1980. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here, folks. I've been blabbing on long enough. You're probably falling asleep by now, so so thanks for watching. And again, if you like these videos, then hit that subscribe button on YouTube, and same on Facebook, and also hit that thumbs up button, that like button. That helps me out as well. So have a good day, and we'll see you the next time. Bye for now.